Yeah, so a little bit about me. My name is Jason Want. I'm a senior software engineer at The Nerdery. You can find me on Drupal.org, at Jason A. Want, and also on Twitter. A little thing about The Nerdery, I joined them in March. We do strategy, design, and development. 500 people all working together, really just to work with our partners to deliver results for them. So today we're going to go through talk about four main topics related to this talk. We're going to dive into AMP a little bit, talk about a little bit of history, where it came from, and then talk a little bit of details about the AMP spec and some things related to AMP specifically. And then get in and start talking about how it works with Drupal. And then we'll do a short sort of evaluation about what kind of decisions you'll have to make if you wanted to implement it with your Drupal project at the end. Anyone have any questions before we get going here? All right, so the historical context here of AMP. Not AMP, just a little more historical context about the web. So, as we know, we all started developing responsive websites way back when, but then recently in the past 3 years, you can see here through this chart that a lot of people just started using their smartphones for a lot more browsing. It's very convenient. We have it on us all the time. And so the traffic has moved to the mobile. Here we have another chart where it shows kind of where traffic is coming from over the past 3 years, and you can see a lot of traffic is generated through Google. A lot of referral traffic coming from Google. It's a pretty big percentage. And other things that have been happening, we've been bombarded with a whole bunch of apps. When apps started first coming out, we probably installed new ones, open it once, and then just not open it. So we only are using very few apps, and what you see is app opens decreasing over time, and you have people still using their mobile devices, and they're still using their main apps like Facebook or Google Chrome or even Amazon for shopping. And here what you see is just take that trend where people are using mobile devices more for their browsing, and you can see by industry what is seeing the biggest kind of jump. And mostly it's in the news. People attribute that to the recent election and then the news cycle that's been happening there. But also you see major increases in retail as well. So you have all this going on. You have the shift to mobile, and you have people using apps less. Some more history here. Before 2016, you've got Flipboard releases their app in 2010, both on iOS and Android. And then also you've got 10 and 12. And then 2013 is when Google Reader, who used Google Reader? It was great, right? RSS feeds. Why was it so great?
It was simple.
It was simple. What was not in the content? Ads. Right. So Google Reader goes away. A lot of people jumped over to Feedly because it provided a very similar experience. And then in 2015, we see instant articles come out. That's Facebook's way to consume content and show content within the Facebook experience that is pretty fast. And then we also see Apple News get released with iOS 9. And then Google AMP is announced in October of 2015. So you can see everyone is responding to the shift to the mobile and providing a better user experience with content there. Oh, let's see. Sorry about that. Here's some bullet points there. Yeah. And then if we jump into 2016, Google AMP results start appearing inside Google search results, mobile search results, as the top story. I don't know if you remember, but it was just the top story carousel started showing up. Again, Facebook now supports native ads in their instant articles. And we've got a few other things happening here. We've got AMP preview. So Google starts changing the way they're implementing AMP. It was the top story carousel. Then you navigated to like a separate sort of experience where it was shown in a preview. And then also Apple News is released. Apple News 2 is released in iOS 10 in September 2016. And that's just to update the experience and the analytics part of Apple News. All right.
And what's the name of the Facebook thing?
Instant Articles?
Instant Articles, okay.
I flipped the acronyms wrong. Sorry about that.
That's okay.
Yeah, Facebook Instant Articles. And that second bullet point, it's not AI. Let's see here. Then in September 2016, Google pushes out AMP results in all of the mobile search results globally. So then you start seeing AMP results. And that means you no longer go to the preview and you don't see the top story carousel. You'll just see the little lightning bolt icon next to a search result in the organic search results. And then AMP celebrates its first birthday in October. And when they celebrate their first birthday, they kind of announce all these things here. They work closely with WordPress community to develop out-of-the-box AMP support with WordPress.com, and also provided support with helping develop the WordPress plugin so that if you're self-hosted, you can take advantage of that. Reddit announced they ramped their pages. Bing has announced that they're supporting AMP pages in their apps. And then eBay, an e-commerce site, is also AMP their content. So in 2016, a lot of big things happened. Google worked closely with a lot of people to get AMP baked in. So, a little bit there about that, and then so what is AMP? AMP is it's an open source library. People can contribute to it, and it's designed for web pages, so you can use existing technology to develop and then serve these really fast pages. And it's also in email. They're starting to work and provide it in email. The other thing I wanted to point out here is that it's compatible across browsers. As you saw in the previous slide, Bing apps were serving AMP pages as well. So it works kind of on many platforms and browsers. It's just a screenshot. You can find it on GitHub. You can contribute. So if there's an AMP component that you don't see, you can work with their team and develop it. So there's three kind of core things that make up AMP. AMP HTML, which is a spec, which is kind of a subset of HTML, very specific markup that you need to implement. The AMP.js library, there's a runtime library that you'll add, and then for each component that you use, you include a specific JavaScript for that. And they do this so they can control exactly how the page gets rendered. And we'll go into a little bit in some of the examples, but I have some bullet points here. Implement best practices, manage resource loading, so it can control what resources get loaded when, and sandboxing all the iframes, pre-calculating layouts. This is very interesting, so that when you deliver the page, in your markup for AMP elements, you specify exactly how it's going to be rendered, so that when the page gets rendered, it knows how much space to provide for what piece of the page, so you don't get a lot of jumping movements. You might experience that with some of the websites where as content gets loaded, you're already reading, but then the page jumps on you because something gets loaded. So that's to take care of that. And then disallowing some slow CSS selectors. So there's some sort of limitations. We'll get into those a little bit. And then really like one of the most things that make it so fast is the Google AMP cache. It's like a content delivery network provided for AMP pages. And then uses HTTP2, which is a new protocol designed for performance. Yeah. And through that process, there's some built-in validation, so it doesn't serve non-valid AMP pages to people that are expecting AMP pages. So part of that sort of quote about what is AMP, it's a straightforward way. I think it's a very straightforward way to implement fast pages because it has a very specific spec. It has very specific limitations and guidelines, and so if you're looking for a very performant page as a developer, it's right there. It's outlined very closely. They have a lot of materials. You just go ahead and implement it. And as part of that, they've got these AMP components. They don't require Java. They don't allow you to add your own custom JavaScript, but instead there's this library of components that come with their own JavaScript for all those other reasons we talked about for performance. And so here's a few that I called out that we'll kind of look at a little bit, and then I've got this GIF that kind of just animates to give you an idea of how well supported all these other components are. Right, so around CSS, there's some restrictions for it. This is basically all you can do. You can't include external style sheets. They don't want they don't want round trips. So when you request for a page, you get the document. But then if you include external style sheets, those are additional requests to go get additional resources, and the page has to figure out how to render it. They eliminate that. You have to include it in line, in the head, and you're limited to 50 kilobytes of styles. They don't want you to create a very big global style sheet that you try to deliver for the entire site on every request. It's very, limited in scope for performance reasons. And they don't allow inline element styles. However, you can include the link tag for external style sheets. You can include custom fonts. So they provide some ways to include custom fonts here through either the link tag or font face in your inline style sheet in the head. So there's some flexibility. Like I said, you can't use JavaScript and you're limited on what styles you can use, but there's a lot of flexibility within what they're providing. Okay, so a few other points about disallowed CSS. There's just a few things that they don't allow because they need to know exactly how to render that page, and they want to make it fast, so they kind of remove the ability to add sort of performance dragging properties like the filter and then the transition properties. They only want to use those that are GPU accelerated so that any animations that you use are super fast. Now they don't allow, it's a very specific AMP HTML spec. They don't allow regular markup like you see these elements here, but what they do is they provide alternatives in the component library. So forms. It's another element that you can use, and there's special ways to use it. You include specific JavaScript. If you're going to do a post, you have to provide an AJAX endpoint, so it's a little more involved in setting up a form for AMP pages. And then they have some, limitations around what inputs you can use and things like that. There's several other things here that I don't mention, but it's really robust and it's worth exploring if you're interested in implementing AMP. One thing here I want to draw is the AMP sidebar. That's a component that provides kind of an off-canvas navigation. So if you need a menu, you provide an AMP sidebar. And I draw it out here because later we'll talk about in the Drupal implementation, this is kind of an obstacle to overcome. But it has some specific requirements about where that element is put into the markup. As you see here, it needs to come right after the body because AMP needs to know exactly where it is and how to render it in context with the rest of the page. AMP carousel. So this is if you wanted to implement a carousel, there are many tools in Drupal that you could use. But here it's very specific about the element and then the kind of the additional attributes that you need to render the AMP carousel. And then also you use the AMP images within the carousel. Another component that provides a lot of flexibility is the AMP bind. Here it starts to look a little bit like Angular or something like that, where you're controlling some sort of state changes through AMP bind. And this is a very simple example, and I think I have another slide here. It's a little more robust example of using AMP bind. But here is a sort of a simple solution where you're changing some elements based on state change of the selector. And so with AMP bind, you can start combining that with many different things. Like you combine it with an image carousel, then with a film strip image carousel. So when someone selects a thumbnail of an image, you show it in the image above and things like that. Or in e-commerce, let's see here. Oh, this is a big GIF. Is that why? Boom. Try that again. I guess it's too big. The file's too big. I'm not sure. So this would show a product page where you have image of you have an image carousel that shows different images for the product, and then you have product attributes where you have like t-shirt size, small, medium, large, or t-shirt colors, and using AMP bind, you can control all of that and have a complete e-commerce solution with an AMP page. And they've worked with that, closely with eBay over the years to try and develop all of those tools. So if we go back to the birthday of AMP in 2016, October 2016, they celebrate these things. And then in 2017, we see a few things coming out. So AMP, they announced Triple Lift serving AMP ads, so they're starting to work with better ad delivery within AMP pages. They have a component, AMP ads. And then they go through, and some of the problems with AMP that people were talking about was the URL. When you originally went to an AMP page, it had a Google AMP cache prefixed URL, and it kind of took away from the authority of a website having their URL shown. And so they started providing the canonical URL in the AMP experience. I don't know if you're familiar with that, where you could copy and share the canonical URL back to the source content. And then they also started developing other things like AMP install service worker. So on a mobile device, if people aren't opening their apps, right, their native apps, they're not opening their apps anymore, you can use an AMP page to get them engaged quickly, because it loads really fast, and then you can use a component like this AMP service worker to onboard them to a more progressive web app that is web-based. So you can then get them, maybe you want to let them use offline content, which is really fast too, and then you can also get them to opt into notifications that way through progressive web apps. So they provided onboarding to, because if people just keep going to AMP pages, they're engaged for that brief moment, but then they go away. But this way allows them to you can provide an onboard ramp for them to increase their engagement with your site. Announces enhanced analytics support, and then also this one in August of 2017, AMP launches fast fetch ads. And what this does is when you load your page in the rendering process, and this is really where it starts to come to light what Google's doing, right? Google is looking at their bottom line, which is ads. They sell ads. And so by having a better user experience, they can guarantee that their ads are getting seen and that they are getting paid, and that their publishers are also getting paid. So here are the fast fetch ads. During the rendering process, by using all this markup and these strict guidelines in fast fetch, during the rendering process, Google will ask for the ad before the page even starts to get rendered, and then it will get delivered during the page rendering. So they kind of split up the request and the response to control the order of everything, so they can just cut off those milliseconds. And here we have AdWords. So AdWords announces AMP page delivery. So now with your AdWords and your ad campaigns, when someone clicks on an ad, you can get them directly to an AMP cache page. So that experience is even faster. All right, so a lot of developer feedback about AMP. A lot of developers don't like using AMP because it's this specific technology that is not really open web, right? So they're taking their feedback, and they announced in January that they're redoing their AMP cache to use web packaging, which is in the process of becoming a web standard. So that by doing that, they're pushing that standard further, and people who don't want to use AMP can also use that technology to then try to deliver even faster pages to their site visitors. Like I said, in February, they announced they're going to start working with AMP and email and Gmail to provide a better user experience there. But also, I imagine, like I started putting this presentation together and looking at this historical context, and you see when you use Gmail, you get ads around the content. And now, if they move to this, I imagine they'll be starting to serve ads from their publishers within the content of the email. Which I think, if I was a publisher and I was delivering email content to my customers, I'm not being able to sell my ads in that content. Google is monetizing that content experience in email for themselves. I imagine there's some back and forth going on between publishers and Google, and this is coming out of that. That's speculative, of course. So again, that conversation about web standards in March, they did a blog post where they're talking about web standards and the technology that they're using. They provide a page in GitHub which lists all the technology that they're using and the status of that going into web standards. So they are sort of responding or acting on their own to promote these web standards. They're responding to GDPR. They have this new component so that before loading all the other stuff, as far as tracking and analytics and things like that, they have this component where someone has to agree to that in the AMP experience. And they have this another interesting thing I found, so that I've been on another project recently working with IP detection and country detection and the tools that are available for that. You have to make a call on a service to get that information. And then AMP has this component where they're just because they're using a content delivery network, right? They know where that request is coming from, and with this component, they're just providing that in the AMP experience with very little effort as a developer. And then in July, coming up, in January this year, they announced that in July, Google mobile page results were starting to rank page performance. So that's coming up in July. So it's not just AMP content, it's any fast page is going to be accounted for in page results now in mobile search, which is a big deal. Because if you're not a very performant site, you're probably going to be falling off the Google organic search results. And it's going to look like all the AMP pages are going to be favored, but that's because they're just that much faster. And I think this is another large GIF that is not going to load for some reason. Yeah, it's not so fast. Well, it's so fast. Didn't even see it. Well, so an AMP page has many different sort of connection points. When you, in a Google search, I'm going to need my notes again. Right, sorry about the delay and the missing animated GIF. So when you're using Google search and you perform a query and you see some AMP results, what's happening is Google is already prefetching that content of those AMP pages in anticipation that you're going to click on it. So when you click on a Google AMP result, that page loads in milliseconds because it's already starting to be pre-rendered. Then if you're going to an AMP page from AMP cache but not from a Google search result, so maybe you're navigating directly to it or you're getting into it from some other app like Flipboard or some other thing like that, that is also super fast, but it's not as fast as that pre-rendering from a Google search because they're already doing it. And then if you can't get to the AMP cache, for some reason the cache has been invalidated, which they provide APIs for, so that if you have content that's being updated, you can invalidate the AMP cache, then it's still really fast. It's like a second or two. And then compared to your websites now that aren't AMP, websites that are already been performance tuned are super fast, but sites that aren't, like I'm working with projects now that the site loads in 10 seconds on a 3G connection. So when you're looking for performance, you're comparing it to like mobile devices because that's where the traffic's coming from and that's where your audience is. And that's what this GIF, lovely GIF, sort of describes. I included this list of resources so that when I share the slide deck, they're there. One thing I'll call out is the AMP Roadshow. So also at the end of last year, Google announced that they're taking AMP on a roadshow. They are going to different cities and promoting it heavily. And I went to a roadshow event in Chicago in late March. And that's really what started me putting together this session. I also was going there at the request of a client. I thought was prioritizing this, so I was pretty excited about working with AMP and the Drupal space. So I presented this. That priority has changed. I'm not in it. I was hoping to be like working on it on a daily basis. But so if you're interested in AMP, I would go to the AMP Roadshow event, and Seattle is like next week, so it'd be pretty tight. But the other events are later in the year. And if you're near one of those towns and you're interested, I would definitely go check it out. I think you just register online and they'll get in contact with you. And then as part of their promotion, they've just provided tons of documentation, examples, a playground, starter, boilerplate stuff. And this was new at the Roadshow. There's also a hackathon event at some of these events. The Google Code Labs, I didn't know about this, but there is a lot of tutorials in Google Code Labs regarding their technology. And if you search for AMP, there's several tutorials there that are very simple to follow. And then there's also this Chrome AMP validation extension. So if you're working with AMP pages, you can add an extension to your Chrome browser, and it will validate on the fly so you know what you're doing. In terms of validation, there's also people put together validation tools for CI process. So if you're developing a lot of AMP, you can just bake it into a CI process and will validate as you develop. All right, so I think I'm going too fast, but Drupal and AMP. Little context there about Drupal and AMP. The Drupal AMP projects that are available on Drupal.org, they were started and launched around 2016 when Google AMP started. And if you think about Google AMP and how it started, it was primarily at that time promoting long-form news articles or other related newsy blog posts, articles, and things like that. So the projects there started there in 2016 with partnership with Google and Lullabot. Let's see here. Yep, right here. So Lullabot did a lot of the development work, and they still do, for these projects. And there's different versions, and we'll go a little bit about those versions in a second. In addition to the module, there's an AMP library that does a lot of the kind of parsing of, if you have a body field that has a lot of rich text in it, it needs to be parsed and things need to pull out of there and whatnot to make it AMP valid. What else can I say here? So again, thinking about the development of these projects in 2016 and the state of Google AMP at that time. So let's look at some of these. So I've got the D8.1 versions. I'm not going to talk about the 7 versions. Anyone interested in doing AMP on Drupal 7? All right, let me speak to that in a second. The 8.1x version that I'm going to talk about now is very similar to the 7x versions of these projects. What you'll see when I start talking about the 8.3x version of the module, that's not going to be backported to the 7x. So let's talk about the 1x versions. What you get. You get a lot of good stuff here. It strips a lot of incompatible markup. It adds boilerplate AMP stuff to make it AMP valid. And it adds a way to add the inline style sheet that we need in the head. That's 50 kilobytes, so you can have the styles for that AMP page. And it prepares template files for rendering, and it also provides an image template that does the AMP image element. So it's very limited in the theme. And then also what you don't get a lot of configuration options with this theme, and you don't get that AMP sidebar. If you remember earlier in the talk, I drew out the AMP sidebar because it's fairly important for navigation. So if you're going to have a full sort of website experience using AMP, navigation is pretty key, and the AMP sidebar is where it's at, and it's not really supported there in that theme. So you have to provide your own sort of logic in the theme to provide that, or between module and theme. And so we'll talk about the module here. The 8.2x version is the recommended version. The 8.1x version provides its own JSON LD for schema attributes for the content, and then the 2x pulled that out and now uses schema_meta tag. That provides the JSON, so you have structured content that search engines like Google can understand and parse, and allows for better indexing for your content. So that's the reason between the 1x and the 2x here. And so what it provides is a lot of good stuff. How it works is you enable the module, you go to the configuration page, and it says what content types do you want to amplify, if you will. So you enable those. Once you enable those, it provides a display mode for those content types. And it only works with nodes at this time, so content types. And then you configure the fields using these display formatters. So you're an image field, use the AMP image formatter. If you use the body field, use the AMP body formatter so that it can do the parsing of that content and things like that. So once you configure the display mode, then the module goes ahead and provides a way to add the AMP rel link to your rendered page so that Google can find the amped version of your page. So what happens is you have two versions of your content. You've got the node/1 article page, if you will. That is your full site and uses your full site theme, and that's the full experience. And then you provide this setup, and it gives you the query parameter AMP, so it allows Google to find the AMP version, which in combination with this display config that I just talked about, it uses the AMP theme that you developed previously to render an AMP page, which is fairly stripped down of things. And then what else does it do? It provides some other configuration for analytics, publisher, double-click, other things that I imagine if I was partnering with Google that they would want in there to make it easier for setup. And what you don't get, again, what you don't get is many of the other AMP components. Remember that previous slide? There's dozens of AMP components. You don't get any of that goodness right now. And you don't get the AMP sidebar, as I mentioned previously. All right, so what you don't get an AMP first approach, which segue into the 3x. So the 3x versions of the theme and the module. This is at the Chicago event that I went to. I ran across Karen Stevenson, who is a Lullabot, who is doing all this work. And she had also done another event, and we both were pretty jazzed about what they were doing. Google was doing with AMP and an AMP first approach. And she started these 3x versions that kind of delivers that experience. So instead of having the two versions of your content, you're just delivering everything AMP. So for desktop and mobile, you have an AMP experience. So everything is taking advantage of all the performance improvements, and you have that super lightning fast experience. And so in that concept of an AMP first approach, you get a lot of different things with these new versions, and it's all experimental at this time. It's not production ready. Tomorrow at the code sprints, if anyone is interested in taking a look and working on this stuff, that's what I'm going to be doing with my time tomorrow. And one thing to note, though, it does add the AMP carousel, so you get that. And then you get the AMP sidebar. There's also some social sharing AMP components in there. And there's quite a few other components. One thing, did I say it there? Yeah, that second bullet point. So Karen has set up a trait so that so developers can quickly develop other formatters using the trait to prepare AMP other components. So you just start thinking about some of the other AMP carousel. There's an AMP lightbox that you could implement and things of that nature. So when it comes to your Drupal project, they're not really simple. They're not easy decisions. There's not a really straightforward path. There's going to be some development work, I think, for a really good experience. And we'll talk about some of those things here. So you have an existing project. If you don't need site parity between your full site experience and the AMP page, and you're just looking to get the benefits of the performance benefits and hoping to get higher page ranking and Google search results based on that performance indicator that's going to happen next month, then using the 8 1x versions or the 7 1x versions of the module and theme is a great solution. There's a lot of baked in. It's going to give you a limited experience, but it'll give you a great starting point, and there's not a lot of lift to get there. You will have to do a custom theme so that you can provide your brand's colors and other style attributes, because of course the parent theme doesn't have any of that. So if you need more parity, so you want to start developing, you have your current site, and you have a lot of features built into your content, and you want to have similar features, you're going to have to do a lot more work. Again, using the current recommended versions, not the experimental versions, the 3x, is probably going to provide you a shorter path because a lot of it's done. But you'll be doing a lot more like custom logic in your theme, perhaps, to make it all work. That'd probably be the shortest path and the least effort. But if you're looking for lots of parity, I would just start looking at the 3x versions. Come to the code sprint tomorrow, take a look at it with me, and then start coordinating what you need with the maintainers and start getting involved with the projects themselves, doing some of the development work. And I think because of the interest from Karen specifically at this time and myself, and there's some other people in the issue queues, there's some interest that you might be able to capitalize on some of the momentum right there. But there'll be a lot of development work, I think, with that approach. And if you wait for the contrib to mature, I think you'll be waiting probably 6 months to a year. If you have, so another bullet point here, just coordinating with the maintainers and prioritizing your AMP components. If you have, you're planning for a future project, again, because of the amount of effort involved in doing a fully AMP site, your least amount of effort will probably still be with working with the current recommended versions. And then if you need more parity, you need more features, same thing at the other side. Just need to start prioritizing the AMP components that you need. Go ahead and create. In the way I have worked over the years, when I start planning a project, I'll go ahead and add a feature request in issues so that there's more visibility about those features, and then I try and provide an outline of how I would build it and get feedback from the maintainers to make sure that's the path forward, and start estimating that work out in line with any project work or what else I'm doing, so then there's transparency. So if you're interested in doing more AMP development, I think that's a really good path because there's a lot of interest right now, and you could probably work together with some of the people and make some things happen. A little other note about that, like I go ahead and put the feature request in months ahead when I'm just doing the planning, months ahead of when I'm actually doing or planning to do the work, so that there can be conversation happening up until that point. And also, at times, someone might come around and go ahead and someone also needs that work, and they share what they've done, and it gives me an easier starting point. All right, so AMP's not the only way. There is, and just recently on Twitter, someone posted a blog post. I don't know if anyone's following the AMP topics, but someone posted a blog post kind of like, all right, if this is I can only get behind this if Google is like, this is a temporary solution, right? This is going to become web standards because this developer didn't want to be, you start developing from one specific framework, you don't know the reach of your work, and oftentimes you don't want to have to redo it. So there's some reluctance there in the developer community. I did mention some of those milestones with the AMP project, that they're recognizing that and they're working with the community on that front. But at the same time, other developers are like, if I want a performance page, I'll just make it performant. I don't need to use AMP to do that, which is very true. So I wanted to call out that here, and I can talk a little bit more about these details. In my view, AMP, I use Drupal because I don't want to build a custom CMS, right? AMP provides a very straightforward approach. In my years, I've been working with Drupal for 9 years. Now, I've been the Drupal architect and now senior software engineer. I prefer implementation than a lot of spinning wheels, and so AMP provides that very narrow framework to implement something that's very performant. And I know that I can see the result, right? It's kind of proven. But at the same time, there's a lot of work involved. And doing a performance audit using Chrome Lighthouse Audit through your Chrome DevTools can give you really key insights into where your site is not performant, and then just tackling those items as you go. Other things, existing solutions for performance. I know, anyone familiar with component-based theming? I know this guy is. Yeah. Is anyone familiar with using libraries in Drupal theming? So it's this I think is sometimes overlooked, but if you do component-based theming and you specify exactly the libraries that you need in Drupal, libraries in Drupal allow you to specify specific CSS and JS assets to render for that library. If you look in Drupal core, you'll see if you search for star.libraries.yaml, you'll see many of these, so that when something gets rendered, it renders its necessary styles and JavaScript. What Drupal does in the rendering process is that as it renders each component, say it renders, say you have a node, an article node, and it has an entity reference field to an image, and that's an image entity, right, through the media. That image has its own assets to render. And if you bundle just the assets that you need to render that image, when the article gets rendered and renders the referenced image, Google is going to bubble up all those assets to render that content to the page level. And what it does is it takes all of those assets that you've defined through your libraries, and then at the very last moment, it aggregates those assets into aggregated CSS and JS file assets and delivers that to the page. So that page then only has the necessary JS and CSS assets. So you can reduce the page load and your asset load for that page. And so you get an aggregated CSS and JS file for every page, every request. So doing component theming and breaking down your theming elements to just the very atomic pieces and bundling your libraries that way, you can deliver very performant pages that way. And that goes way back in the planning process of the design and the theme development and planning and things like that. Other things we know about responsive and optimized image assets, Drupal core has that in. So just using those responsive image assets, but then optimizing the images. There's tools for there. You can do it before you upload the image, or you can build in automation so that it optimizes those images even more. And then again, using those performance audit tools to just drill into the weaknesses of your site, and then just focusing on those improvements as you go, as opposed to doing an entire rewrite for an AMP site or working with the AMP modules. So I wanted to, and this last bullet point, DrupalCon Nashville, very good. I haven't watched it all the way, but very good presentation about how to get 100 on your page speed score from Google. And it steps through all the things there. So it's a very good resource as well for doing that. So I think that does conclude the presentation. Pretty good timing, actually. Anyone have any questions? Yes, sir.
Do you have a library of functions and stuff like that? Can you, like, for example, you have a hamburger icon, you put that in there so it gets rendered?
So the question is, can you, if you have a library, for example, for a hamburger image, for a hamburger menu icon that handles all of the interactions, can you put that into an AMP page? Okay. You can't add custom JavaScript. So any JavaScript that you write can be added to an AMP page. It won't validate, so it won't serve from AMP cache. Because of that, they've provided the AMP sidebar that provides that functionality. So the AMP sidebar has a very specific spec that allows you to create, let's see here, that's the problem with animations, huh? So many clicks. Yeah, maybe I should stop doing that. Let's see, I thought I included the AMP sidebar.
Comes in the first.
So here's the AMP sidebar component. I'll share my slide deck after the presentation, so if you want to see it afterwards, or you can ask me after the session. But it has very specific attributes that you need, and then you create an unordered list of list items and include anything you want in those list items. And then by doing that, and including the JavaScript, the AMP JavaScript for this component, Google will render that hamburger menu for you. So it's just working again within their framework so that they can control exactly how it gets rendered and how the page request comes in. Yes, sir.
So the JavaScript that gets included, can any browser coming from anywhere render these pages, or is this like Google knows how to process this type of page?
No, it's available across browsers. So there's an AMP JavaScript runtime file that you include in the head. And then for each component, if there's specific JavaScript for that component, you'll include that as well. And what happens is the runtime is what parses everything and gets everything laid out and runs all the other JavaScript. So because of that, it can be used on other browsers.
If you were a browsing project, would you try to get it to be your AMP page is your main page that you serve to everybody, or is this second page first?
Can you rephrase the question?
Yeah. So you mentioned there's an approach where you have your main site that has all your functionality, and then you serve this alternate URL for the AMP version of the page,
Mm-hmm.
and that making the AMP first, sort of like you serve the AMP to everybody, no matter what their is sort of that experimental.
Right.
Is that not ready to implement? Would you recommend doing
Okay.
a separate page?
So the question is, of the two options of serving two versions of your content, one AMP and non-one AMP, or just having a site that just serves AMP. So both versions are being done across the web. With the Drupal contrib space in the state that it's in, depending on my goals and the amount of effort I can put into it, if I had my way, I would do just all AMP. If I was starting a new project, I think there's a lot of benefits of that, and maybe as a developer, I would just be like very keen on seeing that be a success. But given the real world constraints of timelines and budgets, I may go for and if I have an existing site, I think I would just go with the two versions. That said, depending on, I would start off with doing a performance audit using one of these tools and seeing what is really keeping me from getting a 100-page score. And depending on the work involved in achieving that, I would compare that work to amplifying my content. You could, and then you go a step further in that. So Google is going to roll out performance page ranking for their Google mobile search results in July. You could have a very simple A/B test where you try to performance tune a single page and amplify a single page, and then compare those two in page rankings or something like that. And then from that, you would determine what would be the best course of action. That would be quite interesting, actually, to see if Google is, like, maybe the page scores are the same. I guess you couldn't do the same page. I'm not quite sure. You'd have to the content couldn't be the same. Or maybe you could with canonical URL or something, so you don't get pinged for duplicate content. But then have a test run and see which one gets ranked higher in Google search results. That would be pretty interesting to see if Google holds up to they're not prioritizing AMP pages. Did that answer your question? In a roundabout way, I think? Yeah. Sorry, it's not really a straightforward answer. Go ahead.
So many questions. So a client of mine has a large news site, so he publishes a lot of stories. That's the main content of the site. So if we would do like the Drupal 7 thing and amplify those pages, there's two versions, so Google keeps track of those two versions and kind of knows that?
Right, yes.
Okay.
So,
and it serves the one based on how the person's getting there?
Okay, so the question is, when you have two versions of your content, one AMP and one non-AMP, how does Google determine which page to serve, and what does the site visitor experience? So the module adds a canonical URL. So you, just like if you have, it adds a canonical URL. So the AMP version of your content has a canonical URL pointing back to the full site version, because that's the canonical. And then the canonical has a link saying, hey, there's an AMP version over here. So Google parses that and understands where. Now, the AMP version is the only version of your content that's going to be able to be served from AMP cache. So in a search result, the AMP version will be shown in a search result with the AMP icon indicating that it's going to be coming from AMP cache. How other browsers support AMP content, I imagine they are doing similar logic in their results, and for search engines, I should say. But it could vary, but that's how it works.
And so on that page, on our typical website, we have a lot of other links to engage the user to go other places.
Sure.
Right? And so is that AMP page going to be stripped down? Or do you just have the sidebar menu item and the content? Are they going to actually see the rest of the site and be able to go?
If you provide those elements and it's valid, it validates through AMP validator. So it has to be valid AMP in order to come from AMP cache.
Yeah.
But I perform a search on Google, I see the result, I click it, it's an AMP page. You have other links in that content that link to non-AMP content.
Yeah.
What happens then is you just go to the source. You link out of the AMP the AMP page.
Yeah.
Those pages don't get served from AMP cache.
Okay.
So that's not really a problem. I would think an interesting situation would be is if you have an AMP, like if you're linking to other articles that are also AMP, if you have an inline link, that's an interesting problem there to determine. I don't know how that would work, whether or not Google would understand, the browser would understand, oh, this has an AMP version, go ahead and serve it. Like if you're reading an article in an internal inline link,
Yep.
and I click on it, I don't know how that would work, or you'd have to do some sort of processing on that link in order to include the AMP query parameter version of that link. That'd be something to look out for. Do you have another? Yep, go ahead.
When you make the AMP version page, does that also work for the Facebook instant serving stuff too?
No. So Apple News requires a specific format for them to serve in the Apple News app. Facebook Instant Articles allows you through their user interface within Facebook. If you go into the configuration side, you can, as an individual user, you can include instant articles if you wanted, or you have a page, you can also manage it from there. So you go in there and you enable it or what have you, and then it ingests the content from your site into Facebook, and then it provides you a way to manipulate that content. So then the content lives within Facebook, and then it serves from Facebook. There are solutions out there that I think Medium.com, they provided a way to just publish directly to Facebook Instant Articles, but the Google AMP Drupal projects they're not compatible or integrate with Facebook Instant Articles. And there may be other Drupal contrib modules that simplify that process to get the content inside Facebook, but I did not look into that. I don't know the answer to that. All right. Any other questions? Thank you very much. Join me at Code Sprints tomorrow if you want to take a look at it again, or see if you find me this afternoon. I'd be happy to chat about it. Thanks, everyone.